Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to Looking Forward Live. Tonight, we're going to continue our series on faith, feelings, and mental health. Our topic is healing from religious shame. This is a tender subject for many people. Some people carry shame from church experiences, from family systems, religious teaching, spiritual abuse, or simply from growing up believing that God is always angry, disappointed, or waiting for them to fail. So tonight I want to be very clear from the beginning that this session is not about attacking faith. It's not about mocking sincere Christianity. It's not about saying that conviction, repentance, or moral growth don't matter. What we're talking about is the difference between a faith that heals and a faith experience that wounds. Religious shame often sounds spiritual, but it can quietly damage the soul. It can teach people to hide instead of heal. It can make people afraid of their own emotions, their questions, their needs, their grief, even their own humanity. So, tonight, I want to help us think about how shame works, how it often gets wrapped up in religious language, and how grace, truth, and emotional honesty can help us move toward healing. And again, I want to reiterate what I said earlier. Tonight, this session is not going to be about attacking a church or attacking faith or mocking sincere Christianity or sincere people's religious beliefs. And it's not even about saying that conviction, repentance, or moral growth don't matter. We're talking about the fact that there is a faith that heals and that there is a faith that obviously wounds. So we'll go ahead and get started. Now, oftentimes we see images like this, and we think of images like this sort of God who uh, seems very unloving and very angry, who is demanding but not very forgiving. So this can oftentimes happen. And I hope that this is not the picture that we carry with us for the rest of our lives. So we'll look at why this conversation actually matters. Why are we even talking about this? Well, religious shame matters because it can look like spirituality from the outside while creating deep fear on the inside. A person may look faithful, committed, obedient, and active in church, but internally they may feel terrified, defective, unworthy, or constantly afraid that God is disappointed in them. That's why this conversation matters, because shame teaches people to hide. Grace teaches people that they can come into the light. As you can see here, it teaches people to hide instead of heal. It often confuses fear with faithfulness. It makes people feel defective rather than loved. It can keep people trapped in silence, perfectionism, and in self condemnation. What happens is shame says, don't let anyone see the real you. But grace actually says the real you is exactly where healing begins. And as we say, a lot of people were taught that fear is the same thing as faithfulness. They were taught that if they were afraid enough, guilty enough, or hard enough on themselves, that meant they were really serious about God or their faith. But we see clearly in the first letter of John, verse 4:18, that there's no fear in love, but that perfect love casts out fear. That doesn't mean that there's no reverence or that there's no responsibility or that there's no room for growth for all of us. But it does mean that a life built on terror is not the same as a life that's rooted in love. So, what is religious shame? Religious shame is a painful identity message wrapped up in spiritual language. It doesn't simply say I made a mistake, it says I am a mistake. Religious shame says something like this: something is wrong with me. God must be disappointed in me. Well, my needs are selfish. My questions are rebellion. My pain is selfish. If I struggle, I'm failing spiritually. And if I'm not always strong, then I must not have enough faith. This is very different from a healthy faith. Healthy faith can tell the truth about sin, pain, weakness, and failure without destroying the person. A healthy faith says, I am loved even while I grow. Healthy faith says truth can be faced without terror. A healthy faith says my humanity is not a problem to God. See, oftentimes we think, well, we can't make mistakes. If we make mistakes, there's something wrong. No, mistakes is the whole point of being a human being. We learn from those mistakes. We learn how to grow. That's how we grow. We go through these various issues in our lives in order that we can hopefully improve ourselves. It's important because many people don't need more condemnation than what they already carry. They need a safe place to finally be honest and tell the truth about who they are and where they are. That's why it's so important. Next, we're going to look at the fact that conviction is not shame. You can hold conviction and you can be convicted of something. Okay, conviction invites repair, but shame attacks your identity. So here, one of the most important distinctions we can make is the difference between conviction and shame. Conviction is very specific. Shame is vague and global. Conviction says that action needs repair. Shame will say you are bad. Conviction says you hurt someone, so I need to go make things right. I need to repair the relationship. Shame says you always ruin everything. There's no redeeming quality about you. Conviction moves us toward truth. That's why I said conviction has hope in it. Shame is just dripping with hopelessness. So, conviction moves us toward truth, toward repair, toward confession, toward growth, and restored relationships. Shame usually moves us toward hiding, toward fear, toward defensiveness, people pleasing, or it can ultimately lead to self hatred. So when we talk about healing from religious shame, we're not saying people should have no conscience and just live any way they want. There's no ethics, just throw all that out the door. We're saying conscience should lead to life and not utter destruction. Having a good conscience and having ethics is not that you live a life that is error proof, but a conscience and good ethics helps us understand where we have made mistakes and how we can learn and repair the issues. The voice of shame is often pretty cruel. The voice of conviction may be painful, but it's not contemptuous. It tells the truth in a way that still leaves room for mercy. Shame can often get you to spiral in a place where there is no mercy. So it's important to think through that. So, some common signs of religious shame. How do you know if you have experienced religious shame? Well, religious shame often shows up in very practical ways. Some people constantly feel like God is angry with them. Even when life is going well, they're just waiting for punishment. They can't rest because rest feels selfish. They can't enjoy life because enjoyment feels suspicious. It's like the old adage about the Puritans that the biggest fear the Puritans had was that someone somewhere was having fun. And oftentimes that's how we can be made to feel that enjoying leisure activities, having fun with your family, going on a hike, just doing something that actually that you love, going playing golf or quilting or you know taking a nap. That's somehow selfish and horrible, and it's just so suspicious. You know, and you'll have others that compulsively apologize. They apologize for doing something for themselves, or they over explain everything. They have to give you long explanations, over explaining always, because they want to do something that may go against what everybody else thinks they should be doing. Or they try to keep everybody happy, people pleasing, just trying to keep everybody happy. Uh, they may feel responsible for everyone else's emotions and choices and even salvation. Now, again, not throwing stones at anybody, but again, a huge problem in evangelicalism is this notion that you're going to have blood dripping on your hands if you're not out doing everything you can do to help someone come to salvation. As if everything, every idle word, every mistake you make, anything that you do that may reveal the very fact that you're a human being may cause somebody to be eternally cast into fire. Well, surely if God is that unconcerned with these things, why would they be? Why would anybody let that happen? It just seems ridiculous. But religious shame, it can make people afraid to be honest about their emotions or how they feel about something or to question anything. They may feel guilty for being angry or for grieving or for doubting. God forbid you would doubt anything or questioning or just admitting they might just be tired. Maybe they're, you know, I have friends that they're so overworked by their church. They tell you in private, they just feel like they just don't want to do anything else. They're doing something all the time, every day, every night. They have to go to work. They have church activities, and they're just burnt out. But you're not supposed to have emotions about any of that stuff. That's not being a faithful person. But emotions are not spiritual failures. Emotions are signals. They're the very part of being human. Okay. So a person can love God and still feel grief in their heart. A person can be very faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ and be sad because somebody has passed away, or maybe a relationship has ended, or something's happened to cause grief in their life. A person can have faith and still have questions. But we're taught in some of our faith communities that questions are horrible, that doubting things are horrible. But we'd have to throw away most of the scriptures. Most of the Psalms are questions. They're questioning God. Oh well, you're not supposed to question God. Well, this is utter nonsense. This isn't faith when people tell you not to question. It's they have doubts about it's that the religious beliefs may be so shallow and so thin that they're afraid a question might just unravel all of it. But if a faith is that weak and that thin, maybe it needs to be unraveled. Maybe it needs to be pulled apart because, a faith should be strong enough to handle any questions or any doubt. We shouldn't be afraid of that. A person can be spiritually mature and still need rest. A person can forgive and still need boundaries. Oftentimes you hear people being rushed into forgiveness. Oh, you got to forgive them. You got to forgive them. You got to love your enemies. You got to forgive them. Get over this stuff. May not mean you may not be in a position to do that. That doesn't mean you're not a faithful person. That just means that maybe you're struggling with this. So I want to say this clearly. You are more than the shame that you're carrying or that you have carried. Okay? You're much more than that. So it's okay. So how does shame get spiritualized? One of the reasons religious shame is so difficult to heal as it often gets spiritualized. Sometimes harmful messages are baptized as obedience. For example, just submit can be used to silence legitimate pain. Maybe you're trying to wrestle with something or you're struggling to understand something and somebody tells you, well, just submit, just quit overthinking all this. Uh, or they'll tell you, forgive and move on. We got to get past this. This can be used to bypass safety or accountability or repair. Because, sometimes it takes a while to work through and repair something. You can just forgive it and move on. I mean, some people can, but some people can't. Or we're here dying to self can become losing yourself entirely. So dying to yourself again is a metaphor that we use for maybe dying to our own ego and things like that. It's basically us tearing down what we think we know and being willing to be taught and raised up and to learn. But you can't do that without making mistakes. So you have to have the opportunity to make mistakes and to learn from it to ever grow. Or you're told, "Don't be angry," and this can become a way to suppress grief, or maybe you're angry about the injustice in the world, or maybe it's there's truth. But some people say, "Well, just don't be angry about it." When you see much of what's going on in the world, you see children being bombed or children being harmed in way, that sometimes that angers us. It should anger us. Or sometimes we're told, be grateful. Be grateful now. That can become a way of shaming honest suffering. Maybe people are suffering. They're struggling and they're suffering with their grief or sadness. And people say, well, now count your blessings. Be grateful. Now, all of those phrases may have a context where they mean something that's very healthy. Again, all these can be a healthy thing, but forgiveness matters, humility does matter, gratitude matters. Counting your blessings can be a good thing, but sometimes it's about context, it's about timing. Sacrifice matters. Sometimes we do need to give up things, but sometimes maybe we've given up too much. So that's why we have to have a faith community that's able to handle context and able to handle timing. Maybe the timing is a little off, and that's okay. But when those ideas are used to keep someone silent or trapped or afraid or emotionally dishonest, this is where it becomes something very wrong. Faith should not require emotional dishonesty. So sometimes healing begins when a person is finally allowed to say, that hurt me. That was not okay. I was actually scared when this happened, or I was manipulated, or I lost myself trying to be what everyone else expected. Truth telling is often the beginning of healing. So that's why we say that faith should not require emotional dishonesty. We have to be truth. You have to have truth in order to begin to heal. It's extremely vital. Let's look at the example that we find of Jesus in the gospel. So when we look at Jesus, we don't see him increasing shame in the people who were already crushed by it. Jesus moved toward people shame, or as Jesus moved toward people, shame had to be pushed away. One example, prime example, the woman at the well was met with truth and dignity. Jesus didn't pretend her life was simple, and he didn't reduce her to just her story. The woman caught in adultery was protected from public humiliation. Jesus didn't deny the truth, but he refused to participate in a shame based spectacle. Next, we look at how the lepers were touched, seen, and restored to community. Peter failed deeply, but his failure was not the end of his calling. And all this matters because Jesus shows us that grace does not deny the truth. Grace creates the safety where truth can finally be faced up to it. Many people are afraid that if they let go of shame, they let go of responsibility. But honestly, shame and responsibility are not the same thing because shame says you're beyond love. But grace tells us you're loved enough that you can be honest and tell the truth. So in John 8:11, we see, John's account of Jesus where he says, neither do I condemn you. Go and from now on just sin no more. You've made mistakes. Uh, Go and live and find grace. It's very important for all of us. So from a counseling perspective, shame often keeps the nervous system in threat mode. That's why this is important to understand. When people feel ashamed, they may hide, they freeze, they please others, they defend, they collapse, or they become hypervigilant. This is why simply telling someone to just believe that God loves you may not immediately heal their wound. Sometimes the body has learned fear. Sometimes the nervous system has learned that religious language means danger, judgment, rejection, or humiliation. And again, healing requires safety. That doesn't mean avoiding hard truths. It means creating enough safety for the truth to be faced without terror. So people need language for what happened to them. They need space to grieve. They need safe relationships where they're not manipulated, rushed, shamed, or spiritually controlled. So a healthy pattern is this one. It's safety, truth, grief, integration, and growth. Safety, to be honest, to be truthful. You got to give people enough time to grieve maybe the mistakes or the failures. Then they have to integrate that into their life now and to make repair in order for them to grow. So many people want to jump straight to growth, but sometimes you can't grow until you've first found safety and you've told the truth and been honest with yourself and others, and you've grieved what was lost. So this process is extremely important. Another important distinction is the difference between humility and self-hatred. Christian humility is not contempt for the self. Humility tells the truth about our limits without denying our worth. Self hatred calls contempt holiness. Humility can say, I'm human, I need grace, I need correction, and I need others, or I need help. Self hatred says, I'm worthless, I'm disgusting, I should not have my needs met, and I don't deserve help from others. And so those aren't the same thing. Jesus said, You shall love your neighbors yourself. That assumes some kind of healed relationship that you have with yourself. So if I hate myself, I may call that humility, but it'll eventually affect how I love others because self hatred doesn't usually produce healthy love. It often produces resentment, produces burnout, forms of control, of fear, and codependency. A healthy spirituality doesn't make us less human, it makes us more whole. It can make us actually more fully human, which is not a bad thing. So, how do we begin healing religious shame? We've talked about it. So, now how do we begin healing? Well, we have to name the shame message. Ask yourself, what am I believing about myself right now? Am I believing I'm too broken? Am I believing that God is disgusted with me? Am I believing that my needs are selfish? Am I believing that I have to earn love? And then, second, separate God's voice from the voices of fear, control, and contempt. Not every religious voice is the voice of God. Some voices are family systems, some voices are church culture, some voices are the trauma you've experienced, some are the fear that you feel, and some voices are just pure manipulation. Thirdly, I would say practice good, honest prayer. Bring grief, anger, confusion, and longing to it. The Psalms are full of all this. That's why I talk about the Psalms often because it has all this honest human emotion. There's the psalmist questioning God, angry about the way the world is working, how that they see that the innocent people in the world are suffering. And prayer doesn't have to be polished to be real, or it doesn't have to have this reverence to it. It can just be honest. So instead of I'm a failure, you could say I'm struggling in this specific area and I need to take one honest step here. Instead of saying God's disappointed with me, I can say I'm afraid God is disappointed in me and I need to examine maybe where this fear is coming from. So and finally, seek safe relationships because healing usually happens slowly, honestly, and relationally. Shame grows in secrecy, but it begins to lose all power when it's met with compassion and with truth. Healing involves learning to reframe the beliefs shame has taught us. So let's look at these for a minute. The old shame message is I'm too broken. God is disappointed in me. My needs are selfish. Questions are rebellion. But we can reframe these through a, a different understanding or different approach. Instead of saying I'm too broken, we could say, well, I'm wounded, but healing is possible. Instead of saying, well, God's disappointed in me, God meets me with mercy and truth. Instead of my needs are selfish, my needs are part of being a human being. And then lastly, the whole thing about questions or rebellion, that's nonsense. Honest questions should deepen your faith and not destroy it. It doesn't have to destroy your faith. All right. I want to pause here just a moment and invite you to think about this personally. Um, think about some of these reflection questions. What shame message have you carried that obviously may not be from God? Secondly, where did you learn that love had to be earned? A lot of us may have learned that. Thirdly, what emotions have you been afraid to bring up in prayer? Are you afraid to question? Are you afraid to be angry? Are you afraid to approach prayer in a different way other than being honest? Uh, And then what would change if you believed you were loved before you were improved? Would that change your outlook? You know, and then lastly, who is safe enough to hear part of your story? Who could you talk to that you could be honest with? So you don't have to answer these publicly. You're more than welcome to put some comments in the comments section below, or again, email me or let me know what you're thinking. But you may just want to write them down later or think about them through the week. But these are very important questions because shame often becomes so familiar that we mistake it for truth. Sometimes the first step towards healing is simply saying, this message has been living inside of me, but I'm no longer sure it belongs here. You don't have to deal with this alone and you don't have to heal alone because grace makes room, for your whole story. Some wounds, of course, need safe accompaniment. If shame is tied to trauma, to abuse, spiritual manipulation, or chronic anxiety or pain, it may be important to seek help and support. If religious language triggers dread, self hatred, or fear, that's worth paying attention to. So if you feel unable to trust yourself, your emotions, or your own story, that doesn't mean you're weak. May mean you've been trained to doubt yourself for a long time. So seeking support isn't weakness. That's actually a very wise thing to do. It's wisdom. There are several times when pastoral care is helpful, and there are times when counseling is very helpful. There's times when both are needed. So the goal is not to rush people back into performing. The goal is to help people rebuild safety, rebuild their identity, rebuild trust, and importantly, rebuild their emotional stability. So I hope you think about that tonight. All right, as we close tonight, I want to return to the central point. The goal is not to become shameless in the sense of having no conscience or no ethics or no way of organizing your life in a way that gives you stability. The goal is to become free from the kind of shame that keeps you from receiving love, that keeps you from telling the truth and being honest, or that's keeping you from becoming whole. Healthy conviction can lead to repair. Shame keeps people trapped in hiding. A healthy faith can help us face truth, where shame makes us feel unsafe or makes truth or honesty feel like an unsafe place. So, grace isn't denial of anything. It's not denial that you've done something or you've made a mistake or whatever. Grace isn't pretending that nothing matters. Grace is the presence of love strong enough to tell the truth and be honest without destroying someone. So, tonight I want you to hear this as we wrap this up. You are more than the shame you carry. Your story's not over. Your wounds are not your identity. Your questions don't disqualify you. Your needs don't make you selfish. Your healing matters. Thank you for joining me tonight again for this Looking Forward Live. If this conversation has connected with you, feel free to reach out to share the video or continue reflecting on the questions on your own time. And just know that Looking Forward Counseling, our hope is to help people move toward healing with honesty, with compassion, and with courage. So, that being said, good night. I hope you have a great week. And if we can help you in any way, please let me know. Thank you.